Okay. All right. So one update from the discussion a couple of weeks ago, I had hoped that we would be able to finalize the topic areas tonight, as these are the topic areas that this task force will be covering over the coming months. However, I did receive 2 requests from task force members that we hold off on finalizing those. And so we are not going to try to finalize this tonight. But what I want to do is basically just go over where things are now and actually talk. We got actually 2 additional suggestions earlier today. Want to let the suggester talk a little bit about that, and then in 3 weeks is our next task force meeting. Then we can come back and hopefully get closer to, and if not finalize, the topics at that point. So if that's okay with everybody, we'll briefly go through the task force document that was sent around. And I know I saw a few comments on some of the discussion of those different items. But before I open it up for additional suggestions or comments on the topics document, I did want to thank John Mooney and Larry Butler for meeting since the last task force meeting with me and also with DPD staff to go over their recommendations. And I'll just flag a few of those with you, starting on, looks like page 10 of the document that Jose sent around. The first one, the historical dimension of the analytical framework. So after talking through the issues raised by the Reston Association folks, basically the path forward, and that's what's in the far right column. County staff will review past actions and communication associated with phases 1 and 2, plan amendments. The information will be shared with RA and at a task force meeting. And so we basically will have this discussed as background information. There are actually a number of topics that will provide important historical context to what's being discussed in this task force, and this will be one of them. And then it's noted that village centers are within the scope of the task force effort. And as we go on to the other items suggested by RA and the resolution, I did want to note that we are trying to make sure that these topics in this task force document, basically the topic areas, are items that could result in comprehensive plan language. So a number of the things suggested by RA are actually items that that are important as background information or perhaps for additional discussion, but may not be areas of new or changed plan text. And actually, before we go on any further, John, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more on that or make any comments on anything I've said.
Thank you, Walter. We did indeed have a very fruitful, cordial and frank discussion about these issues. And we did come to, for example, on the question of the historical dimension of the analytical framework, we did agree that some of those questions are so complicated that they don't lend themselves so much to discussion with contributions from the task force as reviewing the information that Larry and I shared with Walter and Fairfax County staff, and then staff evaluating that and reporting back. And of course, there will be time once that report back occurs to for the task force to ask questions. So I'll leave it at that. Walter, do you want me to, what do you want me to do about the remaining points? are we going to go through them, or?
Well, at this point, since we're not going to try to finalize the document tonight, and I do know there is another task force member who had a couple of additional suggestions. I want to give him time to talk about what his ideas were. Perhaps, John, what we might want to do is see if there are any questions, or maybe, John, if there are any other themes or key issues that you want to flag, and then what I'd like to do is basically circulate this again and ask for any additional corrections or updates to the document. Because I know, John, there were a couple things in here I'm not sure that you had pointed out that I think we needed to clean up.
Yeah, when we did the follow-up from Larry's and my meeting with Walter and Fairfax County staff, we had discussed a couple of ads which didn't make it into this version. If I may just point it out, in that historical dimension of the analytic framework, in column 2, number 4, we suggested adding at the end of that, so where the words now end, rather than real planning analysis, I'd like there to be a comma, and then the words and the exclusion from down planning of parcels without public participation. We can pick up that language later. And also in the third column, Walter pointed out that the consideration of the other sites deemed redevelopable are also not only village centers, but also those parcels are also within the scope of the task force discussion. Am I reporting correctly, Walter?
Yeah, that's my recollection. If anyone from DPD staff has any other comments, please pipe up. But John, I think you're on the right track. Okay. And did you want to go over?
Yeah, there are just a couple of other points that I would mention. One is, let me just here, let's see. On the next page, where the first column heading is a comprehensive plan development monitoring adjustment mechanism. So in the third column, the corresponding third column, they talk about monitoring efforts, but no mention of adjustment. And we believe that a discussion of possible adjustment mechanisms in addition to monitoring mechanisms would be important.
And John, that's on that's on the next page, right? Jose, could you move the document we're looking at down? There we go. Okay.
Okay, so, and it's on the next, I didn't see the, am I missing the words adjustment, discussing adjustment mechanisms? So I see the dashboard for monitoring, but I don't see a mention in that third column of discussion of adjustment mechanisms, such as Tyson's Corners plan has. Anyway, just so you know that was a point of the discussion. And I think I'll ask Larry to chime in if I'm missing something, but I think those were the main missing parts that we had discussed. Larry, can you help me out?
Yeah, I would agree. You hit it on the head.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you very much, John. And again, we won't be going through all the details on this. It will be sent around again with some updated language after this task force meeting. But actually, let me. I know Gary Maupin has a couple of additional suggestions. Gary, do you want to take a minute or two and just note what those are, and then I'll just see if there are any final thoughts And what we'll do is consolidate this into another updated document and send it around. And Gary, we may have some additional one-on-one discussions as well with you.
Actually, those additions were to the planning principles, not to this document. So I can talk those when we get to the planning principles. There are 2 additions that I did want to suggest, but they're not on this document. I would say that I probably have questions on this document and what John just said, and I can call him to ask those questions later, including some of the things he just mentioned. So I don't have anything more at this time on this document, but I do on the planning principles.
Thank you very much, Gary. You are exactly right. I did misspeak, and these are the planning principles document.
I'm sorry.
Which, by the way, we will not be finalizing tonight either. But we will have an opportunity to move forward.
I'm sorry, Walter. Gary, I would welcome a chance to chat.
Thank you, John.
Housekeeping issue, please. This is Tammy. When you all are discussing documents that we have, please give the page numbers so that we can try to follow along. That would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure thing, Tammy. Okay, does anyone have any, again, we're not going to try to finalize the topics document tonight. Does anyone have any additional comments or questions on that, either the content or process?
Can I just say, if you had a few comments, can you submit those to Jose to be added to the comment list? That are in the right column? Not major.
This is Bill Penniman. Can you hear me?
Hey, Bill and Gary, we'll come, hold on, Bill, before you talk,
Sure.
Gary asked a question, and yes, this is really the kicking off point for discussion of these topics. So I would say I wouldn't worry too much about the language being perfect in the second and third columns. I mean, it's really more for background. But yeah, if you do have suggestions, please do send those along, Gary. That's no problem.
Thank you very much, Walter.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on the historical part because there's some language in there I feel uncomfortable with.
Okay.
The arguments about the process flaws, beginning with the first one, suggesting that the members of the first task force were stacked in favor of maximizing development. I just don't think is factually true. There were 6 organizations represented: Reston, RCA, RCC, Reston Town Center Association, and the Planning and Zoning Committee, the Alliance of Reston Clusters and Homeowners. There were 7 at-large members, including Bob Simon, John Carter, Dick Kennedy, our resident expert on low income and similar housing, Judith Pugh, a bunch of people. There were 6 or 7 who are clearly there for either for representing the Chamber of Commerce or particular developers, or had associations with the rail projects, but it was not an unfairly balanced group. And there was lots of discussion on densities. And so the next point, the number 2, phase 1 outcome flaws, it's hardly fair to blame on phase 1 a decision that was made in phase 2, which greatly increased the densities, which were much lower as approved by phase 1. So I think those items of background are useful to keep in mind as we're going forward. As far as the phase 2 process and results go, after a 4-year process of the task force for phase 1, I think the staff was worn out. But in as much as they were mainly just going to freeze the level of development in the traditional residential areas, protect it from development elsewhere. I don't think they thought it was a terribly controversial item. And what they put in about village centers leaves all of it to future debate. I mean, they made it very clear in the comprehensive plan, or at least they tried to, I understood it, that nobody was going to redevelop one of the village centers without extensive work with the community and a rezoning application. So I agree we need to look at all these issues. I don't have any problem with that, but I think people should begin with the understanding that phase one was really a fair-minded group debating things and not coming out where they're accused of coming out. Anyway.
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate your comment, Bill. And one of the interesting things about this process is we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper or with a blank sheet of paper. And we have a lot of history, not just on paper, but also amongst a number of you that have been in the community and participated in various things over the years. And I do want to point out that the language in there, and I think we tried to make this clear, was RA's language. You know, so this is not this is basically, you know, language from one of the task force, couple of task force members, and so I think one of our challenges as we go through is to deal with the things on background that we need to deal with, but frankly, as much as we can, look forward and, you know, try to figure out what makes sense given the history and even the different perceptions of history. Where do we go from here? So, Bill, if we didn't make that clear, I forgive me, but we tried to make sure that RA frankly spoke in their own words, and you know, and didn't get filtered. The right column, the third column, actually was written by county folks. So really, it's the first and the second columns. All right.
Walter, just if I may respond briefly, and Bill, I would welcome the chance to chat with you, you know, one-on-one. We understand your concerns. I'd be happy to share a carefully annotated chronology that led to those conclusions, but this is not the time to get into any detailed conversation. And this is not to pick at old wounds. It's the whole idea of that item, the historical dimension of the analytic framework, was precisely to make sure we had an analytic framework that took care of all the concerns that that will affect how we deliberate now about the future. So, thank you.
All right, good. Thank you all for your patience with the process, and again for doing this, at least starting off virtually as we have in this process. I know this is it's a little bit of a challenge for all of us, but again, as we move through this, I do appreciate everyone's engagement and suggestions and participation. I did want to move on at this point to the next topic on the agenda, which is really the first substantive area that we'll be discussing in this task force, which could lead directly to changes to the comprehensive plan. And this is the planning principles. So since I'm chairing this, and well, frankly, since I'm supervisor, I picked the fun part of this particular task. So what I'm going to do is go back. One of the attachments in the email that came through on the listserv from Jose today were Robert Simon's 7 goals. So I'm just going to go over these very quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to DPD staff, who will then talk about the goals as they are currently listed in the comprehensive plan. Basically, these goals that I'm going to be going over now, the original Reston goals, were updated, and this is basically the starting point for the discussion Do we want to update the goals that are currently in the comprehensive plan in some way, edit them in some way? Do they capture all the areas of interest and concern that all of you have? So we'll be having that discussion, but I get to do the fun part, which are Bob Simon's 7th goals. So goal 1, that the widest choice of opportunities be made available for the full use of leisure time. This means that the new town should provide a wide range of cultural and recreational facilities as well as an environment for privacy. 2, that it be possible for anyone to remain in a single neighborhood throughout his life, uprooting being neither inevitable nor always desirable, by providing the fullest range of housing styles and prices, from high-rise efficiencies to 6-bedroom townhouses. I don't know how many of those were built, and detached houses. Housing needs can be met at a variety of income levels and at different stages of family life. This kind of mixture permits residents to remain rooted in the community if they so choose, as their particular housing needs change. As a byproduct, this also results in the heterogeneity that spells a lively and varied community. Number 3, that the importance and dignity of each individual be the focal point for all planning and take precedence for large-scale concepts. 4, that the people be able to live and work in the same community. 5, that commercial, cultural, and recreational facilities be made available to the residents from the outset of the development, not years later. You know, that's an awesome goal. I just have to comment that I'm afraid that didn't help financially at the time, but I'm really glad he made that a goal. And 6, that beauty, structural and natural, is a necessity of the good life and should be fostered. And finally, 7, since Reston is being developed from private enterprise, in order to be completed as conceived, it must also, of course, be a financial success. So anyway, for those of you that haven't had the pleasure of reviewing those goals, or maybe not in a long time, there you have it. That actually was the starting point for Reston. It really did start as a concept, and out of that came the master plan and all the things that got Reston going. And frankly, these principles, I know for many, especially many folks that came to Reston in the early years, these principles were a real sales point. I mean, this was a self-attractor, or this was an attractor to a lot of folks, and the desire to continue these principles, is something I certainly have heard from a lot of folks over the years. So with that, let me turn it over to St. Clair. I believe, are you going to take on the planning principles?
Yes, I'll be doing that.
Okay, take it away.
Okay. So I believe Jose had put together a chart that he shared with the task force. Yeah, there you go. That highlights the current principles that are in the plan. So as Supervisor Alco mentioned, he went over the 7, it's the original principles, the principles of, Bob Simon when Reston was first established. And with time, as there have been amendments, those have evolved. So right now, we currently have 10 principles in the Reston Comprehensive Plan. When you go to the plan, it again starts with the vision, and on page 10, it starts with the current planning principles. So I'm going to go through them. What you have in the chart, the first column, which is planning principles, is kind of the title for each of the principles. And then the second column is description, and that's actually the currently existing kind of language that's in the plan, kind of describing each of the principles. I'm going to generally go over most of them. What I'm going to do is kind of hit on the ones that are clearly, ones that are new, kind of reflective of just changes that have happened in Reston over time. So again, the first principle is excellence in planning, urban design, and architecture will be community hallmarks. And again, that's getting at, striving to achieve excellence in planning and urban design, architecture, gathering places such as plazas, connection with natural environment, compatibility of uses, livability, and the integration of high quality public art as distinguished features of the Reston community. Number two, planning will provide for environmental sustainability and green technology. Now, this is one that is basically new from those original 7 principles, and that says natural resources and ecosystems, including natural areas, will be protected and restored. Adverse impacts on the environment, such as land, water, and air, will be minimized, and best practices will be used to protect environmental sensitive areas. Green neighborhood and building practices will meet high standards. Tree canopy will continue to be an important component of the Reston visual experience. Number three, development will be phased with infrastructure. The phasing and funding of the expansion and modification of adequate transportation infrastructure and programs and other infrastructure components such as schools, parks, and other public facilities should occur with development. Going on to number four, and Reston will continue to offer a mix of urban and suburban lifestyles. And this is one that was impacted by, again, the extension of Metro Rail through Reston. Says the Metro line, the Metro Silver Line extension will add opportunities for transit-oriented development to Reston's already diverse and unique community in terms of emphasis. With regards to the Metro station areas, they will be livable urban places with densities that step down from the town center to other station areas. The station areas will also be the areas of the highest commercial and residential intensity in the community. With regards to the village centers are important community gathering spaces that include a mix of neighborhood serving retail and service uses, integrated with accessory office, institutional, and residential uses. Redevelopment to augment and enhance the village centers will be pedestrian oriented, should include a plaza as a central element and provide adequate transition to surrounding neighborhoods. Convenient public transportation options should link the village centers and the transit station areas. And with regard to residential neighborhoods will continue to provide a variety of housing types and sizes serving all income levels. Appropriate transitions will be provided between redevelopment and all residential neighborhoods. Number five, the rail corridor will be transformed. Again, this is one that is definitely new from the original 7. Over time, the corridor will become an area with robust, livable, walkable, mixed-use communities having an appropriate balance between residential and non-residential uses. Each of the TSAs, transit station areas, will have a distinct character to meet multiple community needs. The town center will be a livable regional urban center and destination with the community's highest densities and major shopping and cultural features to attract visitors. Wheelie, Reston East, and Hernan will be urban transit neighborhoods. Special consideration for higher educational uses should be encouraged for the Wheelie, Reston East station. At the Hernan station, a special focus should be placed on its central environmental wetlands feature. The highest densities will be concentrated within a quarter mile of the rail stations, tapering down somewhat within a half mile to maximize the use of rail. Residential and non-residential populations in each TSA will be balanced to further maximize rail use and reduce dependency on automobiles. Future air rights development around the station should be pursued to enhance development opportunities, encourage transit use, and improve north-south connectivity across the Dulles Airport Access Road. Number 6, Reston will become a more vibrant employment center. From inception, Reston has provided a place for a spectrum of companies from local to international of varying sizes. Future development and redevelopment should continue to provide a broad range of opportunities for a robust and diverse business, advanced technology, educational, and research community. Number 7 is one that's kind of been there from the beginning. Reston will accommodate people of all ages, physical abilities, and economic circumstances, and households of all sizes and stages of family life. Number 8, connectivity and mobility will be strengthened. a range of high-quality transportation facilities, including roads, bridges, tunnels, sidewalks, bikeways, trails, strengthened and expanded bus and shuttle services, and Metro will link the residential community and residential workers with activity centers, employment, open spaces, parks, schools, and civic, cultural, and recreational facilities. New bridges and tunnels across the Dulles Airport Access Road near the stations are a high priority to increase mobility on the existing road network. A robust transit system, expanded pedestrian and bicycle networks, and transportation demand management strategies will also help reduce reliance on the automobile while increasing community mobility. Principle number 9, high quality public open spaces will be required. Abundant open space and a range of recreational and cultural opportunities are essential components of the high quality of life in Reston. The TSAs and village centers should include a variety of public spaces such as large urban central park, recreational facilities, urban plazas and greens, pocket parks, playgrounds, and other public amenities within easy walking distance for area residents, workers, and visitors. Larger activity recreation areas appropriate to Reston's residential and commercial populations should be provided outside the transit corridor. And number 10, which is key to this task force, public participation in planning and zoning will continue to be the community's foundation. Local participation should remain a hallmark of the planning and zoning processes as Reston continues to evolve as a complete community for the 21st century over several decades. The cumulative impacts of development and redevelopment should be routinely assessed and evaluated. So again, those are the 10 principles that are currently in the plan. And I guess the goal tonight is to start taking a look at the current language to see, is there any important elements that either from the original 7 or just, that are important to anybody that are not being captured in the current language. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Supervisor Alcorn.
All right, thank you very much, St. Clair. So again, as you hear these and look at these, think about whether or not there are things that are missing or are things that you consider very important about the planning of Reston going forward are incorporated in these or captured or not. So at this point, I know we have one task force member that's already thought a little bit about this. So what I'm going to do is offer Gary Maupin. Gary, if you want to talk through a couple additional suggestions that you have thought of, and then I'll open up to see if anybody else has areas that maybe aren't captured in these principles or where these principles might need to be edited. So Gary, go right ahead.
Okay, Walter, I had 2 additions to this. I'm not going to read the description that would be on the left-hand side and maybe a touch of what's I put in the second column.
And Gary, let me interrupt just briefly. Jose actually has also put it into this table in red. So yeah, he beat us to it. And so yeah, feel free if you want to read it off what you sent, or if you want to read it off the WebEx screen here, you can do that too.
I think everybody can read this. What I was trying to get at is, given our status and the way we've looked at things, just putting up a planning principle in here that focuses on looking forward from a technology basis and for change that are economic, social, work life, those kind of things. If we keep that in mind as we go through all the planning activities, I think it helps remind people that we are looking out here for things that are changing, such as communication. In technology, wireless technology, we're moving towards another phase of wireless technology updates. There may be things beyond wireless, and just keeping those in mind and becoming informed of where the trends are going would be a good idea from a whole spectrum of areas. So that is one I wanted to add, and I put some words in on the next to display that a little bit. And then the next one was following along with some of the comments that have been made before and I've heard before, making sure that the comprehensive plan is going to be detailed enough to serve the planning and zoning bodies that have to deal with it, and help the county staff and all of us understand even more about what the comprehensive plan is about. So you can see what it says there. And I'm thinking of the entities that have to deal with this, like the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee, the Reston Association, DRB, the Reston Town Center, DRB, and of course, the Planning Commission for the county. So just wanted to put something in that reminded people of that as we go through the process here of executing the comprehensive plan.
All right, Gary, thank you very much. I want to open it up, and I see several of you have your hand up. So I'm going to start top down alpha by first name. So it looks like Burton Griffith. I think you mean to have your hand up. If you do, go right ahead.
Just trying to unmute.
There you go. You're
Can you hear
good.
me? Okay. Yeah, I have comments on 3 of these areas. One on the housing. I've heard that I know people are having fewer children now than they used to, and I think that trend is likely to continue over the next 50 years. So in the housing section, I've heard that there's sort of a trend for new housing development types that are appropriate for people who want to live kind of in community with other people that they're not biologically related to. So I don't know if that could be captured in some way, or if we should even try, but maybe like modes of family life or types of family life instead of just sizes and stages. Just an idea. On the road mobility issue, personally, I think that the priority for that type of development work in Reston should be to the benefit of people who are moving within Reston instead of people who are moving through Reston to get to other places. So I would like to see a priority on the transportation facilities that are biking, walking, and short trips, not making Reston into major highway intersections that are serving all of Northern Virginia and gateway to Loudoun County and beyond. And then on the suggestion related to technology, there was something about aiming for technology, and I think that technology is not really something that we should aim for. It's something that should help us accomplish what we want to do, which is like quality of life. Sake. That suggestion about technology was also unclear to me when it got into socioeconomic other factors. I'm not seeing the text right now, but it was kind of a run-on sentence, and it was kind of unclear to me what that meant.
Okay, Burton. Thank you very much. And I think between DPD and Jose, well, hopefully, I think we captured your comments there. And I know Jose has been kind of running the show on this, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to see real time your comments, but thank you very much, Burton. And I see Dennis, looks like you're next in line.
Okay, thank you very much. First off, on the principles, I think the principles are great. It's the application of the principles that we need to kind of work on here. Transforming all that beautiful language into beautiful reality here in Reston would be a good step forward. So the other thing, and I may be getting ahead of you here, but with a large group like this, in a limited amount of time every 2 weeks, it's tough to kind of wrestle around with some of these concepts. And so maybe we thought of of offering up smaller groups. Anyone, any of the 30 can participate, but to sort of have a session on specifically, say, the principles, so people can have a roundtable discussion and a little more interaction here. And I think we can come up with a better product at the end. And then that group can report to you and Jose, and then to the whole group. And I think we can make some more progress.
Yeah, we may end up doing that, Dennis. I want to give everybody, at least initially on the task force, the opportunity to participate in this. What we'll probably end up doing, and maybe we end up doing it on this topic, I'm not sure, is basically having maybe having a separate work session where folks that are interested in it, and we can spend more time.
Again, I just think that if we're structured, there's concern about how late we get some of the information, and I know that's going to get generated as we go along here. But I think if we had a session, say, just on this, and most of us know the background, and most of us have heard this 100 times, so we don't need to go through that again. We can just jump right in, and as I said, hopefully we can make some progress.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. All right, Jason has his hand up.
All right, I just wanted to try to encapsulate what I heard a couple speakers ago. I'm sorry if I don't remember, but it was regarding trends. And I think as a preface to the plan, and something I would recommend would be helpful to set the stage for the plan itself would be to have a bucket of emerging demographic, technological, and economic trends. So we can kind of capture everything. And what that does is really starts to inform a new comprehensive plan for Reston. And these are the things I think we are being mindful of that are on the horizon that may shape some of the planning that we do. So I think that would be a good way to kind of encapsulate and put in a bucket those things that we see will impact planning moving forward. And then one comment on the planning principles, and I just did a quick search, and I know it's kind of inferred throughout, but I don't see the word equity once in the planning principles, and I just want to be mindful of that, and that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Jason. Good points. Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Walter. So my question, I know that we're looking at adding planning principles, but I think that it would be beneficial for this group to understand how we got from the original 7 principles that Robert Simon came up with. How did we get from 7 to 10? Was that an output of the task force planning group number 1 or number 2? And then if it was the second, I would think that we may want to go back and just make sure that folks do agree with those additions and at least give them consideration.
All right, Lynn, thank you. Can somebody help us out who is part of that process? Did this come out of the Phase 1 task force? I think it did, but I don't know, to be honest.
This is Bill Penniman. The answer is yes, it did. There was somewhere along the way, these principles were drawn up, adopted, and then carried forward. And Bob Simon was very much involved in the discussion. So.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Walter.
Yeah, sure. And Bill, actually, let me probe that a little bit more, Lynn, because you raised a good point. So Bill, in terms of, do you recall the discussion? Why was it really an attempt to try to just update Bob's original 7? And I guess Bob was sitting there, so maybe it's easier to do. But I mean, was that the idea, just to, modernize them or update them, or were some of these other things brought up for other reasons? Can you remember?
I think that they were designed, A, to be compatible with the original 7, and B, reflect the fact that the arrival of the Metro was a big deal. We have 3 stations in Reston, the expectation that there would be some kind of transit-oriented development around them, creating opportunities for existing residents as well as potential new residents. And so I think those were the factors, trying to and the arrival of the new with all the original expectations of the original 7.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. Tammy, I see you have your hand up. Why don't you go ahead next?
Yes, I'd like to expound on the principles. I would like to say that the several of us unaffiliated, in other words, no vested interests in the task force, just observers and completely neutral citizens who witnessed that. We tried for 2.5 years to get a planning principle committee on the first task force, and were denied. Finally, we were so persistent that John Carter was allowed to chair it, and it was very instructive. And I believe John could tell us exactly how we went from 7 to 10, but no doubt it was through that process of that planning principles committee. That was, you would think when you're doing a plan, you would start with planning principles. Nobody wanted the commercial interest didn't want anything to do with being regulated by planning principles. So it was well into the process before we were allowed to have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy, and that helps. I appreciate your background on some of the landmines here as we walk through this field. This is helpful. John, John on the line? I don't know, John, if there's anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, Tammy is right. I actually was at least the primary author for all the principles, so I was a little reluctant to criticize them too much, but there are probably a few words that could go in there. One of the ones that was debated quite a lot, but ended up is the 10th principle, which was not an original principle and was a departure. This was about the community participation would be a hallmark. I don't have it in front of me, but that was a new one. I think the environmental one was I don't know if it was new, but it was strengthened quite a lot. And then what Bill Penniman said was the different areas. It called out the different areas of Reston, which wasn't there before. So that's how we got there. I think the way it worked is I actually drafted the initial one, and then we did pretty much what we're doing today is go over them and just make the changes real time. I will say this, that we might not want to spend too much time critiquing it. We can always make them better, but it probably would be really good to circle back when we get to the end to make sure the principles reflect what it is that we're about to be doing. So I know we all want to make them perfect, but doing a few changes now, but then circling back when we're at the end to make sure the principles match the planning would be good.
Well, thank you very much, John. John, I have to warn you that you're getting awful close to violating the Reston dogma by talking about John's 10 plans as opposed to Bob's 7. But I do understand. You did have the pen, it sounds like.
I just started, but there was definitely the group spent a fair amount of time on it, so it wasn't just John's.
Okay, I see Jan chimed in on that as well. John, what we might even want to do is take it just another step further, is perhaps not just at the end, but maybe even at various points through the process, we might want to bring these back and just kind of, particularly if we get to a place where maybe these could help provide a guide, as we're moving through this process. That could be useful, because you're right. This is basically high level guidance, and a lot of good things to remember, I think, as we go forward. Okay, thank you for that background. I'm looking to see if anyone else has their hand up. Bill and Jason still do, but I think that's just a technical issue. I can hardly tell when my hand is up and when it's down, because it's pretty much the same color. But Anybody else? Oh, Mark Looney. Mark, you have your hand up. Go right ahead. Mark, you have your computer muted. Mark, we still can't hear you. Hey, Mark, we're going to come back to you. Sorry, it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you yet. Let's do this. John, let's go to you, John Mooney, and then we'll come back to Mark and see if we can get technical issues fixed. So, John, do you want to go on ahead?
Thank you, Walter. I'll be brief. I think it would be good for us to have a conversation about the adjective used to designate Reston, and by that I mean one Reston. Sometimes it's designated now, I've heard it publicly designated even by people in high positions as an urban area. And I would submit that Reston is much more rich and complicated than either urban, suburban, natural, but that its genius, if we can maintain it, is having this intricate, rich combination, balance between these various areas. So I think discussing the adjective we use for Reston would be important, especially in this urban, suburban, or whatever continuum of descriptors. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And I would recommend certainly any suggestions you might have along those lines. I think would be welcome. It could be a very good discussion. Wanted to circle back to Mark. Are we able to get you unmuted there? Okay, still can't hear Mark. All right, Mark, we'll come back. Charles Colby has his hand up. Charles, would you like to talk?
Hi, yes. I just a comment and a question. Comment-wise, I wouldn't sell short this original idea of including being cutting edge in terms of technology. I actually grew up in this area, though not in Reston. I always remember looking at Dulles and thinking we were living in the Jetsons age, and that's how I viewed Reston. But we're facing those kinds of issues in our own cluster. Like a big thing coming up is charging stations for electric cars. We're converting all our lights to LED now, and I'm sure there'll be other issues. So I always felt Reston should be ahead of the curve on that. And then just a question, if no one can answer it, that's fine. But I was looking at the principles of Robert Simon, his principle number, I found something number 3, I think it is. It's the importance and dignity of each individual be the focal point for all planning and take precedence for large scale concepts. And it seems kind of squishy to me, but I was just concerned that it's important. Do we have it adequately covered in these other principles that were our redesign here of the 10 new ones? I'm not even sure
Charles,
what it means.
that's a great question. Who wants to take that on? John, do you want to take that, or your version 2, the drafter of version 2 anyway? Do you want to? Was there discussion about that one?
I don't remember that discussion, but maybe there's one of those principles could be beefed up in both of those comments, both this one and the technology comment. Maybe those deserve to be put in. I would try to not do too many principles because we lose the thoughts of them. But if we need one, we need one. One other thing I want to mention is that we're doing a land use plan here. So those two principles I think are okay, but we don't want to drift away from the charge, which is these should all relate in some way to land use planning.
Yeah, and as we deal with these big density projects and looking at growth, we start to get more in the direction of the large scale concept. So I hope we don't lose sight of the individuality aspect.
Yes.
And maybe it's thing that infuses, you talk about we urban or suburban or rural or suburban or whatever, maybe that's kind of the thing that ties us all together. But it is hard to get a handle on, but I'm just saying it could be something here to think about that could tie all of these together and define us in a unique way.
Maybe it's that principle that the language that you're talking about could be added to that principle. We're talking about urban, suburban, and in between. We could add the comment that you're talking about to that section.
Yeah. The important
thank
thing
you.
is the dignity of each individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit. This is something I have a vague memory of having some conversations a while ago on this topic, and I think, and I'll have to check with a couple of folks that actually might have focused in on this, but I'm pretty sure this was another principle that was a negative reaction to Levittown. It basically was, Bob really didn't want to see the cookie cutter suburban model of, row houses, production row houses, and, the industrial model, if you will, of the living pattern. And I think this was sort of his idea to push back against that, and I know one of the things that came out of this was, they actually tried this crazy idea of placing the nicest, biggest house next to the smaller, least expensive house, and they plotted that all around and tried that for a while. Again, with the idea to move away from production level, industrialized communities, and to really go towards something that is much more human scale and focus. So I know, does anybody else have any other insights into that one? I know that's been some of the discussions I've had.
Maybe it's becoming relevant again now that we're building up instead of scattered out. So that's all I'll say. It feels like some of the newer things we're looking at and building are now on this mass scale.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Good.
Any other comments?
Walter, it's Mark. Can you hear me now?
Hey, I can hear you, Mark. Yes.
Sorry, my work headset doesn't like WebEx, so I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me, and I was unmuted the whole time, so I apologize. The question I had was, from a process standpoint, were you looking to have buy-in for these two additional changes tonight, suggestions? Is this just food for discussion at a later date? What do you want to have accomplished by the end of the night?
What I would like is to identify any additional or I guess significant changes to the planning principles as they exist currently. And, we've had some suggestions. We might not want to add any or maybe too many. The two that Gary put forward, I'd love to get additional feedback to see if overall, if it looks like the task force might be amenable to including those. We don't need to come to any firm decision here, because I know this is the first time the groups had the conversation, and also for at least Gary's two suggestions, the first time anyone's seen those this evening. So, so I guess initial thoughts would be good. And the idea is we would provide an updated document, and where there are maybe changes that didn't appear to, if there are any changes that come up tonight, then we would want to incorporate those and show those as changes to the current comprehensive plan principles. And then at the next meeting, talk through those, see if they make sense, maybe incorporate some of those changes, maybe not. And at the next meeting, come up with if you will, a final draft of the planning principles that then could be used throughout the rest of the process. Does that make sense, Mark?
It does. With that in mind, one observation I'll make or caution I'll provide, and it probably won't come as a surprise to some folks on the call that I say this, that I completely understand the desire to add significant detail to the comprehensive plan in an effort to kind of lock down in the comprehensive plan many of the things that folks would expect to see at the zoning stage. But as someone who helps implement these things, that can be a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of things that the comprehensive plan, if you get too detailed, can in fact prevent or discourage ingenuity and creativity when it comes to implementing some of these things, because this document is intended to be a guide and not the law, both by statute and in practice. And one of the things that Fairfax County suffers from is that over decades of task forces like this, if you were to lay the comprehensive plan on its side and stack them up volume by volume, you'd be at 4 or 5 feet in the air. And as a result, you end up with a lot of unintended consequences sometimes when you go to implement the things in the plan, and you end up having to do a lot of amendments and revisions over time to deal with circumstances that are brought on by the economy, by the environment, by whatever, in a way that you couldn't anticipate when you were writing the comprehensive plan language. And so I understand the sentiment behind it, but at the same time, it can be problematic if you get too detailed in the comprehensive plan as to what you want to see. Setting out broad goals and objectives is great, and setting out kind of the rules of the road are great, but I caution about getting too detailed with some of these things for fear that it stifles creativity. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Glad you got that headphone fixed there. So I see Reston Bell has her hand up. So Reston, why don't you go next, and then Jan Bradshaw after that. And by the way, I do want to also see if any of our attendees would like to make a comment on this here in a few minutes. So Reston, go right ahead.
Yes, I just was wanting, I guess, a little bit of clarification. So I had a chance to read through the 7 principles outlined by Mr. Simon, and then I see we've got these 10 principles here that we're looking at. And I guess I'm just trying to understand, are these 10 principles like us building upon the original 7 and they're to take the place, or is this what we're saying our goals are as a task force, given what we understand the principles of Reston to be? Okay, yeah, good question. So what we're really looking at is 3 phases in time. So the first with Robert Simon's original 7 principles were back from the 60s. So that's provided historical context, and frankly is the inspiration for a lot of folks that moved to Reston. The 10 principle document, I'm not going to start calling it John's principles, John, even though you drafted them. But the next, those 10 principles are the ones that currently exist in the comprehensive plan. So those were basically incorporated about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think the attempt was to build on the original 7 principles. And so now the third time phase is we need to look at what's in the comprehensive plan currently, the 10 existing principles, and see if those need to be changed. So that's what, and I took the time and enjoyed, frankly, reading the 7 original principles.
to make sure. I know there are a lot of folks that don't want to lose the original ideas behind Reston. And so that's the purpose of starting with those 7.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. So with that in mind, I think it was Charles that kind of mentioned it. I do agree that I guess that's number 3 is a little squishy. Like, what does that mean? But at the same time, it's like everything, right? Like a lot of what Reston was like centered around. And so with that being said, I mean, we might, play with words, however we wish to make it seem like a more concrete, principle, but I do think that that needs to be, reflected, I'd say a little more clearly or more plainly in the current principles, because I just feel like it's lacking that quality. I feel like that, artsy fartsy kind of creative or like really personalized touch is really central to what makes Reston different than, say, Herndon or Sterling or what, like that's like we kind of have a different quality, right? Like that's like the way that we consider people and things and environments. Yeah, I do think that's one of the things that sets us apart. So it is a little loosey goosey, but I do think it's central to what makes us distinct from other spaces. And if we're trying to hold on to that, then I think we need to find a way to better incorporate it into this newer set of principles.
Thank you, Reston. That's an excellent point, and it's also a heck of a lot of fun to represent Reston as an elected official too. Just point that out there. That individuality is something else. It's awesome, actually. Jan, let's have you go next, and then floor is yours.
Well, I just want to say that I think that incorporating these things in the master plan is really a good idea. I think that you can do it in a way that people also live and work in the same community, so it has to do with the different types of housing. I heard, I guess I didn't hear, I saw next door a discussion of people who were saying that the emphasis now is not on condominiums, that the young people that are coming in now really want houses. So I was surprised at that, but I know that everything is townhouses and condominiums and apartments, and very little emphasis has been on residential homes, and yet the young people who can afford them with these well-paying jobs definitely want one. I just wanted to pass that along and say that absolutely the whole master plan should be guided by Robert Simon's ideals. And I think you've got a good workable start here.
Thank you very much, Jan. Appreciate that. I do want to, if there are any other task force members that want to make a comment, I want please raise your hand. I also wanted to see if there's anybody in our virtual audience who signed on as attendees who would like to make a comment. And Jose, can you help us, guide us on how someone can do that if they're an attendee?
Sorry, find my unmute. So if you open your participant pane icon, it's the person holding the 3 plates. Underneath the participants, you should see a little hand and a microphone. If you click that hand, you should be able to raise your hand. And it looks like we do have 1 hand up.
Okay, yeah, it looks like Rick Hamilton. Rick, do you want to make a comment about these planning principles?
Sure. I'm not sure it's exactly toward the principles, but it's sort of for me, the last time I went through this process, I kept getting a little confused, I guess, by the use of some of these following words. And I just looked at the comprehensive plan, and so I just picked some at random. Guidance, best practices should be strive to achieve, abundant, range of. I would suggest that those things are capable of multiple interpretations, And I'm just curious, and I wasn't here, at the beginning, as to, what do you do when you have words that can have multiple meanings, drastically different meanings, to different people in this plan document?
Rick, it's a good question. And, what Mark said earlier is accurate about this comprehensive plan being a guide. But I do need to add something to that, which is it's a guide that is almost always followed in Fairfax County. So, and I think one of the reasons that you see some of the little bit squishier language is because it is taken very seriously by the Planning Commission, by the Board of Supervisors, when reviewing, say, rezoning applications. And with that in mind, there is a tendency to use some of those words like should and guide and that kind of thing in the text in order to basically allow for at least some flexibility and some creativity. Now, I guess with that in mind, it is very important, and this does relate to these planning principles. It's very important for the comprehensive plan to address the issues that are of utmost importance to the community. So it's one of the reasons I want to make sure that that we do reflect some on these planning principles so that we're capturing those elements that are most important. Rick, does that make sense?
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't have any issue by and large with the principles. It's when you get into the plan, and yeah, I understand that that's been the way we've done business, but that could change in terms of how the county views us, and so forth. So I'm just I said it years ago, and I'll just say it again. I was an engineer for all of my career, and these words do not appear in specifications. At least they shouldn't. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. But yeah, I understand what you say, and I can't argue with that. But I think we just need to be careful that we don't have instances of using that kind of terminology where it could bite us in the end and have unintended consequences, if you will.
Rick, I appreciate that. There is one other piece that I should probably mention, that it's also one of the reasons you need to be careful about who you elect. So, and I don't mean to be self-serving on that, but it is true. There is flexibility in the way that the comprehensive plan is structured, not just in Fairfax County, but throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So be sure to vote. I see, let's see, Lynn Brown looks like has, Lynn, you have your hand up. Do you want to make a comment? Go ahead and unmute yourself, or Jose could.
Yeah, looks like Jose's unmuted me.
There we go.
I just wanted to give a shout out because it scrolled through too quickly for me to fully read it. But I think it was number 10 that talked about the rail areas. There was a special mention of Herndon Monroe, I believe, and the fact of a 1/4 mile designation, which is normally the TSA area. But for Herndon Monroe, that's not actually true, because my community is part of that 1/4 mile, because the TSA area cutoff is Sunrise Valley. I suspect deliberately to exclude my community. But it does mean that any development at that TSA has massive impacts on polo fields. So I am glad to see that we focus on that one and we take special care about what happens, because I think in every other TSA area, there is not housing literally across the road from the metro station. So if they put in high density housing, for example, it's going to look into our back gardens or front gardens or windows. So I'm glad that that is in, and I hope that that stays in as a principle, that this TSA is different.
All right, Lynn, thank you very much for your comment. Appreciate that. You know, we've heard some suggestions on these planning principles. What I would recommend at this point, because I do want us to get to the last item on the agenda this evening, but what I would recommend is that everyone take a look at the 10 planning principles and also the suggestions that were made tonight and presented tonight, and think about what would make sense. We will go ahead and I think DPD will help us write up some possible changes to these planning principles. We'll get that circulated to the group, I would say at least a week before our next task force meeting. And we might even get through more than one round of edits. I'm not sure the next time. We'll see if we can stretch that out a little bit. But if at any point folks want to take a little bit of a deeper dive or have some other ideas on process, feel free to talk to my office. I am open to a process that is both open and also continues to move forward with this effort. So I think we do have some flexibility on that, but I want to make sure it's manageable. Okay, does anyone have any final thoughts on the planning principles before we move into Reston population? Okay, all right. Well, it's 8:21. Let's, we're going to spend probably the next half hour or so talking about Reston population issues. Now we're going to have a couple of presentations here from county staff, and let me just provide a little bit of context. There is currently in Reston's comprehensive plan, there is currently no type of guidance relating to Reston's population, either as basically in any form. What we do have, remember the comprehensive plan is up here as the guide. Then we have zoning ordinance, and in the zoning ordinance, we have the PRC ordinance, which does provide a population density cap of currently 13 people per acre. So that's become an issue of a lot of discussion in the community. However, that density cap does not apply to most of the area in the transit station area. So basically, the areas in Reston that are basically planned for and seeing the fastest growth, the PRC is not relevant. So one of the outcomes I would like to see of this process would be some population guidance in the plan in terms of the expectations for what Reston's population will ultimately be. And I know some folks in the development community don't like the term build out, so I'll try to avoid that term. But frankly, when Reston is fully mature, you know, through, I would call it, you know, the redevelopment phase, and, you know, where will we be? You know, at roughly what population level? It may end up being a range. It may end up being a number. And one of the other things that I would suggest we might want to think about is an interim population level at which additional planning or replanning would be expected to be done. So it had been suggested that we start with Reston's population as in this task force process. It was then suggested that, you know, actually the population of Reston probably is something that you would want to calculate as an output of this planning process. And what we've come up with is both. Okay, we're going to look at Reston's population early in the process now as at least a bounded guide for where we think Reston will be or should be at some point in, to use the term build out, comprehensive plan. And then we would also look at a calculated population of Reston towards the end of this replanning process and see basically is that where we've ended up once making some changes to the comprehensive plan or recommended changes to the comprehensive plan. So for the next few minutes, we're going to be really think about it this way. In order to make a more educated, I wouldn't say guess, but a more educated estimate, guidance of Reston's population, we're going to hear from a couple of folks that are experts in population projections and are going to talk a little bit about how that's done. And so, St. Clair, who do we have up first for this?
Sorry, can you hear me?
There, now we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, so we're going to have two presentations. First, we're going to have Clara Johnson from the Department of Planning and Development, and she's going to give a brief presentation on the comprehensive plan regarding population potential and how comp plan text or recommendations are interpreted and how they're quantified. Following that, we're going to go right into a presentation from Fatima Kaja from the Department of Management and Budget, and she's going to be providing a presentation on Fairfax County's population estimates and forecast methodology, just what goes into, creating the data that the county uses. So we'll go through both of the presentations back to back, and then we can, open it up for questions.
Okay, that sounds great. And it's Clara Johnson, is that right?
That is correct.
All right, Clara, welcome. Thank you very much. Claire, go ahead and start us off.
Sure, and here's the part I've been most afraid of, sharing my screen. Let's see. So my screen. Oh, did that work?
Yes.
That is working.
Terrific. Maybe I can go to the first slide. Even better. Okay, well, again, my name is Clara Johnson with the Department of Planning and Development. Thank you. It's good to be with you tonight. Really, my purpose here was to just make some connections between some of the information you've already received and to make sure that the distinction is clear between this comprehensive plan potential or comprehensive plan build out number that you've seen and how that's different than what I think is kind of the main event of this presentation, which is this terrific information that Fatima Kaja provides in the her annual report. So you've already heard a few presentations about what the comprehensive plan is. So the idea is that we take this guidance and we convert it into these numbers. These are some of the tables you've seen for the transit station areas. We've quantified, we've given some picture of what that plan potential is in terms of these generalized land uses, including some estimate of residential dwelling units. And then for the area outside of the transit station areas, also quantified that. And what we've done is we've quantified the entire county, actually. We've looked at the comprehensive plan where there are development options. Here's a very simple example where this area is planned for 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre. And so for a single use, that's relatively straightforward. Some portion of that, this guidance indicates has already been built at 4 to 5 dwelling units per acre. And so we quantify that, and that becomes a part of our accounting of this comprehensive plan potential. It gets a little more complicated because these plan development options can be categorized into simpler single-use options like residential 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre, or for instance, a office use at a 0.5 FAR. That's the most straightforward math. But when you have a mixed use option, as you do in many of our mixed use centers, like the Reston Transit Station area, you might find an intensity like a 0.7 FAR, where a number of general land uses are encouraged. And then there might be percentages or ranges of percentages. And then there might be a couple of different options for that area. So in this example, there's one that envisions some office along with a lower percentage of residential use, or in part B, maybe a predominantly residential use with some support retail or ground floor office or retail. So in a picture, that might look like this. We might have, we can maximize those residential options for the county, for a study area. Somebody might ask us, what happens if you maximize the residential component of a mix of uses? Or what happens if you maximize that commercial or non-residential use? And we're able to provide both of those estimates so that you understand what the impact might be of maximizing those uses. It's generally office and residential use, for instance, when you're thinking of peak hour impacts for transportation. So again, given that there's a lot of flexibility in these mixed use options, we do provide these maximum residential scenarios or maximum non-residential scenarios. We do also capture intermediate scenarios just to reflect what the multiple options are in the comprehensive plan. And what are these used for? These are often used for land use studies, transportation analysis. I know our planning partners at Fairfax County Department of Transportation often ask for both scenarios so that they can understand that. And an input, and you'll see in Fatima's presentation that this is one of the many inputs that goes into her analysis for a population forecast.
Hey, Claire, can I jump in real quick? I'm sorry. You mentioned a term earlier that I'm not sure everybody knows. FAR, when you're talking about particularly office. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure, floor area ratio. And so for, see, I didn't bring a graphic for that. That's often, so if you have a property that's 100,000 square feet, a 0.5 FAR means that the building would be half of that. It could be 50,000 square feet, one story. It could be 50,000 square feet. If you can imagine 2 stories, so it's about on a quarter of the property. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's really the end of my presentation. Again, my purpose in being here was just to make a connection between this being an input for the population forecast, but one of many inputs, but also noting that this is really different than the population forecast in that comprehensive plan build out isn't anchored to any particular point in time. It's some indication, it's some estimate of the capacity that the comprehensive plan has for development.
Very well said. Thank you. Thank you, Clara. St. Clair, do you want to introduce our next speaker too?
Okay, yeah, so while we're transferring presenter authority, yes, so again, Fatima Kadir, she's from the Department of Management and Budget. And they work on they're usually working on I guess it's a year-round process of putting several things, modeling things into creating data that, various county agencies can use. And she's gonna be providing a presentation, just giving details on really what goes into their methodology methodology, incorporating many local factors that, kind of give us confidence in the information that's provided. So I think she has present authority now, and I will turn it over to Fatima.
Okay, let's, Fatima, oh, great. There, it's coming online, and be sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I will do that.
Fatima, you're already unmuted.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, let me just move things around a little bit so I can see. Okay. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to talk about Fairfax County's population estimates and forecast methodology. But before I go into that, let me just tell you a little bit about who we are. So the Economic, Demographic, and Statistical Research is a small research unit that is housed in the Department of Management and Budget. We conduct quantitative economic, demographic research, analysis, and modeling. We produce the county's official small area estimates and forecast of population, households, and housing units. And it is a countywide function serving and working with every agent, department, and agency authority, as well as Fairfax County Public Schools, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and the U.S. Census. So we work closely with of course, with the agencies, but also with the outside of Fairfax County. So basically, I wanted to focus on three major sources of information to, where we get population estimates and forecasts for county. I will primarily focus on the integrated parcel life cycle system that produces the county's official estimates. And most of my, my presentation will be based on that. But because census also produces population estimates by small areas, I think it's worth mentioning that, as you know, the decennial census is being conducted right now. And one of the things that they're going to do this time around is introduce a new methodology in their data tabulation. And the primary reason to do that is to protect people's privacy. So they will introduce noise into the data, so certain population and their characteristics will be masked. And this will be a trade-off for accuracy. So, I think they're trying to figure out what the balance is, and I hope they do come up with a good balance, considering Fairfax County is a very diverse county. Then I just briefly wanted to mention redistricting data will be released to the states at the latest by July 2021, pending congressional approval. And American Community Survey data, which is really very rich socioeconomic data that is produced on this survey using their survey instrument. It's a 1 year, it comes out every year, and also they also have the 5-year data, but they do not forecast population. Esri is another product that produces population estimates and 5-year forecasts by most of the census geographies. So since you all are looking at a specific geography within Fairfax County, I think it's helpful to know what data are available from different sources. So our data is actually a parcel-based data. So you could use any geography, but we do have census geography. We have supervisor district, planning districts, human services. And any user-defined geography can be used to do analysis on our data. ACS, of course, is census block groups, tracts, census designated place, and so forth. And Esri also has the same geographies as the census. I wanted to just kind of show you what the Reston census designated place is in relationship to where the county is. And here you can see that area, and all of you are very familiar with these roads, so you can kind of see the parameter of this Reston designated place. Let's see. Currently, there are 61 CDPs or census designated place in Fairfax County. These are some of the inputs from the sources, and I'll just list a few of them. So the integrated parcel lifecycle system, which is our system, we have a lot of administrative data. We get real estate data from tax administration. We have GIS data from our GIS department, all the parcels, land development system, planning and development. We get data from them. Fairfax County Public Schools, looking at their enrollment, Fairfax Water, American Community Survey, USPS. So as I said, it's parcel level data created and can be summarized by any geography. American Community Survey is, of course, a survey that is sent out to households. And basically, over the 5-year period, about 1 in 9 households will receive one of these surveys nationwide. But the sampling rate is higher in areas with smaller population and low predicted response rate. ESRI also has a lot of input from different sources. And they do produce estimates and forecasts. I am trying to figure out how to get out of my notes. Let's see here. Is there a way that I can
Fatima,
share the screen? Uh-huh.
can you try your display settings?
Okay. Is that better?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for telling me. So ESRI actually has a lot of great inputs from many different sources. They do produce, estimates and forecasts. But as you will see, I will show you a map down the road where you can see where some of the discrepancies are. So what is IPLS? IPLS is an application and parcel-based information system. So the system collects and links administrative data from multiple databases across the county. And these data contain the most current information for Fairfax County and provides insight on the housing unit inventory and its characteristics, residential development activity, non-residential data, land use data. So most of these data sets are not designed to talk to each other. So this application uses a robust data model to join data from all of these systems at the parcel level. We start fresh every year, so all the data are from January 1st of each of the processing year. So it's a snapshot in time. So let's take a closer look at the system. So here's a diagram shows where all the data comes from that feeds into the integrated parcel lifecycle system. So we then process, analyze, interpret, and create data at the parcel level. You can see that the foundation of the system is the parcels, and then we create centroids. We also keep a parcel history and bring in a lot of different geographies. From the tax administration data, we have certainly the parcels and all the characteristics of the parcel as well. Sales information, assessment, what the use is. We then go to different types of data, which is we get data from Fairfax Water, and we look at their consumption reports, their account statuses. We get data, the school enrollment data by area from public schools, Fairfax County Public Schools. We also get data from, we look at censuses data on migration, average household size, and vacancies. CDCs, we look at the birth and survival rates. And actually, I need to put one here, which is the USPS here. That data gets fed into what then ultimately gets processed, analyzed, and then we create our housing unit by type. Then we create average household size and vacancies, and then forecast assumptions. So looking at the bottom part of the diagram, we start when part of the forecast assumptions, what we do is we look at the zonings, the proposed, which is sort of like a placeholder until they're approved. So we know what type of housing units they're rezoning for, what the land area is or gross floor area. We then move to the next stage, which is sort of the development plans, which are site plans, subdivision plans. Again, it's what's proposed, what's approved, type of projects, and how many units are associated with that. But here, this gets very complicated because just because a zoning is approved for, I'm just saying like 100 single-family detached units, it doesn't mean that they will all get built. Plans will come at different stages. They may come in 2 or 3 different subdivision or townhouses, site plan, multifamily, whatever. So the process, what it does is what we do is we try to calculate what is in what stage of development, including the building permit stage and inspection. So when it finally becomes a housing unit. So it's trying to figure out, so the units are not double counted in different stages. We then have to go through this process until we come up with a good a system and a data file, which is sort of the foundation of our, I would say, our short-term forecast. Then the long-term forecast is based on the comprehensive plan and plan options, which Clara mentioned, and then the planned land uses that are associated in the comprehensive plan. Here is just sort of, I talked about some of this, the current estimates, inputs, real estate data goes in, and then also the condition, which is very important in defining what a housing unit is. We look at the, how old it is, the condition of the structure, what percent complete it is, assessed value, sales value, what the land use is, the zoning, and so forth. So in order, for us, the goal is what is a habitable unit? And that may seem like an easy task, but it isn't. There's a whole other flow charts that we use to come up with what a housing unit is. We then look at how to create households, which are occupied housing units. So we look at Fairfax water data, their account statuses, the consumption to figure out, the owner vacancy, and also the US Postal Service data. The rental housing data we get from we get the rental vacancies. So we look at that. We also look at the census data and to see how close they are to what we have. And it's really a combination of all these data used to create the vacancies by owner and renter, which then creates our household, which are occupied housing units. We then move to create the population estimates, and that entails looking at the average household size by race and ethnicity and age from the American Community Survey. And we also look at the school enrollment by area. The water consumptions are used sometimes to look and see if there's a change in average household size. But over time, there hasn't been much change, even though there is a slight trend on actually the average household size overall for the county is just slightly going up. So once we figured out our household population, we then move to the next phase of our population, which is the group quarters population. These are people who reside in group living arrangements, and this includes dormitories, nursing home, barracks, detention centers, and so forth. So a combination of household population plus the group quarters population is what the total population is. This is just an example of a study area. So since our data are all at the parcel level, here's an example of the user-defined study area. So for housing unit, our data are very accurate at the parcel or the point level. However, household and population estimate require caution when using small geographic areas. So larger geographies will have more accuracy and smaller geographies will have less accuracy. And that's because all these assumptions have gone in. So now let's take a look and see how we create our forecasts. So to create our forecast housing units, we must first figure out the parcel attributes and land uses. So what is vacant and underutilized residential land that can be used to forecast future housing units? Underutilized land is defined as land that contains additional potential for housing unit greater than the number of existing housing units based on the comprehensive plan. So this potential is based on the parcel's attributes and planned land uses and what the current utilization is. So using information about the acreage of the parcel and planned land use, an estimate of potential housing unit is calculated. So each parcel gets an assigned assumption and they're grouped based on its characteristics and such as existing housing units, how buildable it is, are they in the development activity, and so forth. So there are many assumptions that go in. So then an underutilized residential data set is created and used as the foundation to create the forecast of housing units. We do not do, as Supervisor Alcorn said, we do not do build-out forecast. What we try to do is forecast what we see is the most likely scenario. And primarily because so many agencies depend on these forecasts that we need to be as accurate as we can be. So when they're planning for whatever it is, whether they're going to build schools or they're going to put sewer lines or whatever the case may be, that we don't overbuild or underbuild. So, because there's a cost associated with that. So we try and do our best to come up with the most likely scenario. Having said that, we're not perfect. So now that we have the data set of the vacant and underutilized land for residential use, we can now start the forecast of housing units. First, as I said, was the short-term forecast, which basically looks at the residential development activities that includes all stages of development. And then we also look to see how fast things are moving within each stage of development, which kind of, so there's some analysis that goes into that as well. So over the 5-year projections, we are about a little over 1% average percent error for housing units over 5-year of forecast period. So, and this is based on our 2019 data. Once we have the short-term forecast, we then focus on our long-term forecast period, which could be 6 to 30 years out based on the planned land use, the comprehensive plan, the plan options that were mentioned, and then the existing parcel characteristics. So based on that, our accuracy over the 10-year projection accuracy over the 10-year forecast period is a little less than 3%. Here's just a comparison between ESRI and our data. So our data here, what you're looking at is the growth from 2018 to 2045, and you can see where all the dark areas are is where there is more growth. But when you look at the ESRI, I mean, they do show some growth, but in some cases it's not in the right place, and it's because they just don't have access to all the data that we have access to. So that's why I said using caution if you were going to use ESRI data. And ESRI data are good for other things, but not necessarily population forecasts. I want to spend just a little bit of time to talk about the census designated place, which is it's a census geography. And basically it's a community profile of the county. There are many of those in the county. And here we're showing it's a combination of what we do from IPLS and what census has. So the population estimates and projections are from us. A lot of the socioeconomic data on the far right and the far left are from ACS, but some of the stuff in the middle is from us. So just to kind of go over some of the figures here. So in Reston census designated place, the poverty is almost 7% compared to Fairfax County, which is about 6.2%. It appears that Reston has a lot of office buildings or gross floor area, basically for offices. The age of housing, it looks like it's about 2/3 30 years or older for Reston, whereas Fairfax is about 46%. Looking at race and ethnicity, Reston is mostly white, not Hispanic, whereas Fairfax County is probably now, I would say, it says 51%. So I have a feeling by the time census comes out, we might actually be majority minority at this point. Persons that speak a language other than English at home, that's for age 5 and over. Reston is 27% compared to Fairfax County, which is almost 39%. So lots of interesting data out there. And you can look at other communities. I have a link here on the bottom that you can take a look at. Here is just sort of shows you the two comparison of the land uses. And because we have access to the internal data on the land uses, we're much, much more granular as to what we can produce, as opposed to, there's definitely a place that other agencies use this pictometry and LiDAR data, but their business is different than ours. So we're able to produce the land use map at a much finer level. Here is another example of our data, population estimates based on the same what census block groups that are for census CDP, and then what ACS, American Community Survey, has the same block groups. And clearly you can see that one of the biggest thing is the difference in population numbers. And then also you can see the closeness of our data compared to the ACS data with their margins of error. But, you know, and that's the good thing about ACS data, is that you can see, a user can say, well, you know, for these block groups, maybe the margin of error is so great that maybe it's probably not a good data to use, as opposed to some of the other data that are much closer. Here is another sort of a comparison between Fairfax County and ACS. And basically what I want to show is that the difference in the population sizes for each of these block groups by the shading of colors. And then the pink bubbles, the larger the pink bubbles, the greater expected error for those estimates. So again, you know, you can see that our data is much more accurate, you know, than even the ACS. Here, I sort of, you can see that some of the areas that in the middle of Reston CDP, there's really a huge difference in the population. So I wanted to kind of zoom in and show you why. So here, just looking at that particular area, the middle part of that Reston CDP. Just looking at the two block groups, again, the population sizes are very different. You know, some of the data now, these names came from our Department of Tax Administration, and I know name changes when properties, either management changes or whatever the case may be. But this is what I got from, you know, from the our tax administration data. So just kind of wanted to show you some of the, you know, the granular data that we have available to us. The other is, this is the most updated one. We just updated this one from, you know, this spring. And again, you can see the area that, you know, has all these housing units that are there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have such granular level data at such small geography that you could, you know, if you wanted to look at population estimates and forecasts, maybe you want to use those. This one, it's just a map that shows, you know, some of the civic association. Here's an overlay of the parks, trails. These are some of the data available through our data from our IPLS at the parcel level. ACS also has a lot of great data. And ESRI has data that, you know, other than population, they probably have good business and marketing data. This is basically all the reports, the demographic reports, which is an annual publication, you know, that is produced by us. You can access some of this data via these websites, and the methodology is also, I have the link here. And so thank you. These are languages that are spoken in Fairfax County. So English, Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, Korean, and Chinese. So
All right. Fatima, thank you very much. Appreciate that very thorough presentation. And will we have, and actually maybe I should ask St. Clair, will, I guess we have a copy of that already that's been distributed. So,
yes, I believe Jose already distributed copies to the task force.
Okay. All right. I know, you know, I've been watching the time, and I know we started a couple minutes late after 7, but I don't want to totally blow the record of ending these meetings too late, past 9 o'clock. This is, hopefully you found it helpful to understand some of the elements that go into population projections. What we're going to do is tee up at our next task force meeting in 3 weeks. We're going to tee up, bring some of this technical information down to how this might fit in the comprehensive plan context and talk about that. So before we break, does anybody have any last minute questions or comments?
I do, Walter.
Yes.
I'm very familiar with this throughout Washington. And every jurisdiction in Washington does this pretty much the same, although I suspect Fairfax perhaps does it a little bit better. But this information feeds into the Council of Governments. And what does the Council of Governments do with it? That's how the population of the whole region is based on this. The transportation model that the Council of Governments uses all of this information to calculate the transportation needs for the region. Now, Council of Governments is only recommends, but that's where you see a lot of this data comes from. Also, affordable housing is also a major contributor to this. So what is the share of each region is calculated by the Council of Government based on the population. I would also urge us to think about population, whether that's the right format. in the 60s, when Reston was created, using population forecasts was very common in Newtown planning. We might consider either keeping if you want to keep the population, but it's the housing units that may be just as important as the population, because there's quite a few changes that occur over a long period of time in terms of the number of people per various unit type. So I would keep in mind whether that should be a population calculation or whether it's a dwelling unit calculation in this.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. That's great points. And I guess I shouldn't presume that putting any sort of population or household number in the plan is something this task force wants to do. Let's talk it through and see the value that it can that it could provide, and then talk about the not just what type of unit we might want to use, but also what number we might want to start thinking about. So, John, thank you very much. Very helpful. All right.
Walter,
yes. Last comment.
Walter, this is Larry. I've just got a question, if that's all right.
Sure, please.
Some future thought. So, given the robust data set that the FATMA has to work with, which is much more than any of us individuals in the Reston community who have tried to predict what the population might be. And I don't think it's a simple question, but based upon the existing comp plan as it stands today and the approved rezonings, okay, and and I know there's the mixed use, as Fatima went into the detail where they look at the high and the low. What is the current population forecasted if no other approvals were done, from this point for the next 2 years? I mean, we've had a major slowdown in the last 3 months, but I think it would be of real interest to the task force to know what the current population forecast is based upon where we sit right now with the current comp plan and the approvals that have already been done.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And we did have, I believe, the numbers 2019 and then 2024. I believe it showed going from about 65,000 to 70,000 roughly. But Larry, you're probably talking maybe a little beyond that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's basically, we've got about 3/4 of the land bay in the TSAs that went through the initial entitlements and are those forecasts inclusive of all those approvals up to the most recent ones that have been done.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think, St. Clair, is that information that either of our presenters might have at their fingertips, or is this something we should tee up for the next meeting?
I'm going to defer to Fatima to see if she can provide a response. I think, we may have to, it may require some, further evaluation, looking at all the factors to be able to give some feedback. So it might be better to provide it at a later time. I don't believe that is something that we would ever provide, a detailed answer right now. But I'll defer to Fatima to see if she has anything to add.
Fatima, do you have anything to add right now, or?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, can we provide population number based on the current right where it stands? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think that's what Larry asked for. And basically, without any new zoning approvals, but I don't know, Larry. I mean,
so this is the way this works. What we do is a point in time. We take a snapshot of everything at January 1st. So all our assumptions, everything is based on the January 1st timeframe. And let me explain why that is because the base is the parcels and also the DTA, the Department of Tax Administration real estate file. Only one time of the year that file is completely clean and updated. The rest of the time, that file is a working file. So they put a lot of things in there that we cannot use. So it's just before the file roll takes place for the taxes, is one time. So that's why everything we take, residential development pipeline data, everything that comes in. So it's a snapshot in time. And this is a modeling. So I'm not sure if we are able to, unless, I'm not sure. I cannot answer that question.
No problem at all. And Larry, what I would suggest, because I have some similar questions myself. So Larry, what I would suggest is, as folks have population related issues and maybe even projections or numbers that they would like to explore, if they could share those with Jose over the next week or so. And then what we'll try to do is we'll compile those and then sit down with staff and see what we might be able to tee up to help the discussion in 3 weeks. Larry, would that be helpful?
Yes.
Okay, then let's do that. So if other folks, and I do want to wrap it up because we're almost 10 minutes after 9. But if other folks have ideas on what kind of population analysis or projection or estimation might be useful, please do send those to Jose, and be happy to talk through any issues as well. So if there's nothing else right now, please let's. I think we've made some progress. We got through some things this evening. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And please do contact my office, talk with Jose, or also Lisa is my communications director, is also on this call. As you have suggestions or questions or ideas, and everyone have a nice extra week off. So it'll be 3 weeks again before this task force meets. So have a happy 4th, everybody. And thanks very much for your participation in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah.